the city of Adelaide, the fifth most populated city in all of Australia, comprising of 1.5 million people. It has often been described as one of the most livable cities in all of the world. But every city has a story, and it has a beginning to that story. So this video is going to look at the very start of that story, dating all the way back to 1836, the very foundations of the city. So, without further ado, let's begin. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all. From those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome to the story of Adelaide. I'm not going to waste any more time. I just wanted to do the intro, so let's just get on with things. The founding of this city starts where it often did in the late 18th and early 19th century, and that is the British Parliament. In 1834, the British government passed an act allowing the creation of a colonisation commission to be set up in southern Australia to venture forth to the southern Australian coastline and found a free city. This was not a place for convicts, a penal colony like that of Botany Bay in 1788 or the Moreton Bay colony of 1824, where hard graft was meant as a punishment. Adelaide was founded on the basis of free commerce, where hard graft would get you a parcel of land and where you could emigrate with your family and create a better life for yourself compared to that in England. And so in the year up to 1836, a number of inquiries and advertisements were made to the British public, recruiting passengers to start a new life over in South Australia. According to the Colonising Commission's report, 546 people were registered as passengers on the 9 ships that would leave Portsmouth and London between February and June of 1836. Now, unlike the world map which I tend to use when describing these great journeys, I've presented this particular journey as a sort of a line chart between England and South Australia. Now, this is because a lot of the ships during the travel between England and South Australia left at different points throughout 1836 and arrived at various other points in 1836. Some were a lot slower and some were rather rapid in their journeys towards South Australia. And so, on the 22nd of February 1836, 4 ships left the London dockyards bound for South Australia. They were the John Pirrie, the Rapid, the Cygnet, and the Emma. The Cygnet and the Rapid were Colonel William Light's survey ships, so that when they arrived in South Australia, they would be able to survey the land and pick a suitable settlement area for which the colony to begin. The John Pirrie was the smallest of all the 9 ships to leave for South Australia and carried just 28 passengers. And although the Emma was slightly larger, it only carried 22 passengers. 24 passengers boarded the Rapid and a much larger 84 bound on the Cygnet. Skipping ahead now to the 5th of April 1836, the Duke of York, which carried 42 passengers in all and was the main supply ship for the animals and provisions of the colony, left the London dockyards. And 2 days later, the Lady Mary Pelham, another small ship carrying 29 passengers, left the Portsmouth dockyards. And then finally, on the 28th of June 1836, 3 ships left the London and Portsmouth dockyards. The Africaine, carrying 76 passengers, Tom O'Shanter, carrying 74 passengers, and the large HMS Buffalo, which carried the Governor Hindmarsh, John Hindmarsh, which carried 171 passengers. On the 27th of July, 1836, the very speedy Duke of York and Lady Mary Pelham, having only travelled for roughly 2.5 months, arrived on Kangaroo Island and set up the King's Coat colony. The King's Coat settlement was established on the northeastern portion of Kangaroo Island. And as I mentioned, in late July, the Duke of York and the Lady Mary Pelham had already arrived and set up the initial colony on this area. Colonel William Light would arrive here on the 2nd of August, 1836, followed 2 weeks later by the John Peary. And then on the 11th of September, the second of the surveyor ships, the Signet, arrived here also. It was quickly established that the King's Coat settlement was not going to be a suitable area for a major province or colony. And so William Light set about on the Rapid and the Signet in surveying the areas between the Port Lincoln and the Encounter Bay area. This area right here. Having gone up the St. Vincent Gulf and finding it equally unsuitable for a new colony, Colonel Light turned his attention to the Spencer Gulf. And in his investigations around this particular area right here, he found that the plains were very suitable for a new colony. The soil was rich and the rain prospects were good, and there was a safe anchorage at this point right here, this sort of southern point of the mainland, which he would name Holdfast Bay, and the beach Glenelg Beach. Colonel Light then made preparations for the colonists and its ships to land safely at the Holdfast Bay area. And last but not least, slowly sauntering into the party, the HMS Buffalo, having travelled 6 months across the oceans from England and carrying with it Governor John Hindmarsh. On the 28th of December, Colonial Secretary Robert Gouger made a proclamation on behalf of Governor John Hindmarsh. It was proclaiming the establishment of the South Australian colony as well as its government. Within the short text of the proclamation, it was declared that all the colonists should conduct themselves on all occasions with order of quietness, duly respect the laws, and by a course of industry and sobriety, the practice of sound morality. Now, the proclamation also gave mention to the local populations that had lived in this part of Australia for thousands of years. It was stressed that the same protection would be given to the Kurna people who lived in this area of South Australia. It was given the same protection as those of the colonists. And any of the colonists acting violently or in an unjust manner against the Kurna people was to be given a severe punishment. The Kurna people were to be considered as much under the safeguard of the law as the colonists themselves, and equally entitled to the privileges of British subjects. And as a further point, the 1834 Act, which had described this southern Australian region as a wasteland and unoccupied, was amended by 1838, changing the wording to recognise the Kurna people and the area in which they live in. Now, whether the wordings to the proclamation or the Act of Parliament were actually adhered to, that remains a different story. The Kurna people had no reason to trust the European colonists arriving in 1836. The populations had been decimated by smallpox over the last 50 years, travelling via the Murray River from the Botany Bay colony to the South Australian regions. There were only 300 people remaining by 1836. But meetings between these two respective parties were quite present, and they were quite cordial. Meanwhile, on the beaches of Glenelg, the tensions were fraying amongst the colonists as they were anxious to buy their parcel of land and settle into their brand new lives. Governor John Hindmarsh didn't want to run a rabble of random people. He wanted to run a colony. And he pleaded with Colonel Light, why can we not have the colony right here? But Colonel Light thought that there was grass that was greener on the other side. So he travelled along what is now known as the Torrens River, about 7 miles, and he found the perfect site, the perfect area for his vision. And it is this spot which we now call the city of Adelaide. Across the Torrens River and away from the main city centre stands atop a hill a statue of Colonel William Light. Light directs the viewer in his pointed pose to marvel and admire his great vision of the city of Adelaide. Now, unfortunately, this viewpoint has been obscured in most recent years because of the reconstruction of the Adelaide Oval in 2012 and 13. A diary extract attached to the statue, dated 1839, reads, "The reasons that led me to fix Adelaide where it is, I do not expect to be generally understood or calmly judged of at present. My enemies, however, by disputing their validity in every particular, have done me the good service of fixing the whole responsibility upon me. I am perfectly willing to bear it, and I leave it to posterity, and not to them to decide whether I am entitled to praise or to blame." Oh, and you know what? We're going to have to conclude the video here because it's probably going on a little bit too long, and we're going to have to wait till next week to find out what happens in the next chapter of the story of Adelaide. See you later, folks.